This conference will now be recorded.
Good day, everyone. I see there's still some people joining, and I saw a last-minute registration there. So just give it a couple more seconds here, I guess, and we'll get started. All right. Well, welcome to our 9th chapter in our monthly CyberSecure Canada webinar series. Today's topic is cyber insurance, featuring Patrick Bourk, Principal National Cyber Practice Leader with Hub International Insurance Brokers. My name is Brendan Dunphy, and as always, I will be your host today. I'm the Director of Trust Compliance with CyberNB SIPNet. For any new participants joining today, I just do a brief overview of CyberSecure Canada, and then I pass the presentation over to our industry guest speaker, who presents on the specific control topic. This webinar will be recorded. Participants can ask questions via the chat box. We will address any questions during our Q&A portion at the end of the presentation, time permitting, of course. And if there's any questions that aren't addressed, or if you think of later, they can be asked directly to hub@atl.inbox@hubinternational.com or info@cybernb.ca. So let's get started. So for our trust and compliance program, CyberNB's goal is to help organizations of all size operate safely in the digital economy. The main goal of our programs is to help organizations that require accreditation, certification, compliance, meet those goals easily and inexpensively. This is Canadian businesses must ensure their systems, operating practices, and data are secure, and this is especially true for small and medium organizations, which often lack the resources that large organizations have to continually monitor these threats. So CyberNB connects businesses with accreditation bodies and certification bodies so they can mitigate the risk and obtain required certification at a low cost and impact to those organizations. So we do this with liaising with national and international certification bodies, helping businesses attain required certification, like I said earlier, and promoting best practices and assessing vulnerabilities and threats. Once these organizations do achieve certification, it does help them expand market opportunities to compete in supply chains that require accreditation or certification. So what is CyberSecure Canada? Well, it's basically just a voluntary cybersecurity certification that was developed by the federal government of Canada. It's designed with the following goals in mind: to improve Canada's small and medium organizations' cybersecurity baseline, raise awareness and educate all Canadians about cybersecurity, and increase consumer confidence in the digital economy of Canada. It is based on 13 control topics, which are displayed here on the screen. So today's topic, cyber insurance, would be part of develop an incident response plan. There's securely configured devices, enable security software, backup and encrypt your data, secure portable media, and so on. So there's many different control topics. This is a very robust certification. Each of these control areas may have 1 to 3, maybe sometimes 4 controls below each of these. So it results in around 50 control areas that you'd have to address to achieve successful certification. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go in depth on each control today. We're going to focus more on the cyber insurance portion. So for cyber insurance, the control under this topic would be baseline control 1.3. Organizations should consider purchasing a cybersecurity insurance policy that includes coverage for incident response and recovery activities, or provide the rationale for not purchasing one. So what will the certification body require when they're assessing this control? Well, the organization will need to provide their cyber insurance policy certificate, and they'll also have to demonstrate that their coverage supplies incident response and recovery activities. Or the organization has to provide a rationale for not purchasing the insurance. So how do you get started? Well, that's really easy. You just head over to the CyberNV website, CyberNV/Trust and Compliance, and select the Get Started button under the CyberSecure Canada column. This will direct you to our secure online portal, where you can process all the CyberSecure Canada certification requirements in one easy place. So to register to this portal, the cost is $350 Canadian plus tax. This provides access to the portal, which will clearly demonstrate the control requirements, as well as the required supporting evidence to support the controls to achieve successful certification. So this is an example of one of the controls, and it actually is the control that supports the baseline control 1.3. So we call these statements based on, by clicking implemented, your organization is indicating that this statement is true. Baseline control 1.3, organization shall consider purchasing a cybersecurity insurance policy that includes coverage for incident response and recovery activities, or provide the rationale for not purchasing one. So down here is where you would actually provide your evidence. So provide your organization's cybersecurity policy or the rationale for not purchasing the insurance. So if you wanted to attach files, you can use this choose files option and search for the file on your local machine, upload your insurance certificate and or your policy coverage information that details that you have incident response and recovery activities included in that to help make sure that you are able to restore from an incident very efficiently. Down here, you'll see that the Submit for Certification button is grayed out. That is due to you actually have to complete all of the statements on the portal, all 50 statements, in order to be able to submit for certification review. At that time, you'll be contacted to choose from one of the 4 accredited CyberSecure Canada certification bodies you would like to review your submission. The cost of the certification review is set by the selected certification body and may vary from one to the next. The current CyberSecure Canada accredited certification bodies include Bulletproof Solutions, Cybersecurity Canada, SourceTech IT, and WATEC Cyber Risk Management. At any step along the way, of course, if you require any assistance, we have a group of registered practitioners that are able to guide you at any step of the process. So it could be anything from a general question to implementation support, or even completing the entire assessment for you, even filling out the submission on your behalf. Save on cyber insurance. So this is very relevant to our conversation today. Our agreement with Hub International provides organizations a 10% premium discount off of cyber insurance standard rates. It underscores the point that cyber insurance is a must-have and not just a standalone protection. Your other business policies, from professional liability to umbrella coverage, may have gaps in how well they protect you. Cyber insurance can close those gaps. So if you wanted to visit our website to get more information on our insurance, you can, or on the Hub Insurance offering, please visit cybernv.ca/trust and compliance. Coming soon. I mentioned this last webinar. This is, we're going to keep on mentioning this for any new participants. E-learning modules are coming from ICED Canada that will help organizations understand what the requirements are and help train them up on how to implement these requirements. So it's very exciting news. They're currently under development. They shouldn't be too much longer. I think it was a early summer release, designed to help understand the control requirements and implementation, like I said, and best thing, they are free. There'll be no cost to these. This is just to help organizations understand the controls and get them implemented in order to achieve the certification. So as part of our monthly Partner Spotlight series, we will be showcasing a specific partner and the unique offerings to the CyberSecure Canada program. March's Partner Spotlight features Hub International. Hub International is an insurance brokerage providing an array of property, casualty, risk management, life and health, employee benefits, investment, and wealth management products that and service across North America. They are the fifth largest insurance provider in the world and are very eager to help organizations find the right size coverage needed to maintain their business operations. We have a Partner Spotlight page on our website with a blog that was written by Hub International's own Jason Urquhart. Please visit our website and check it out. So now I'd like to introduce our industry guest speaker, Patrick Bourk. As an insurance coverage expert, he provides technical expertise in the analysis, placement, and negotiation of various management risk insurance coverages, including professional liability, crime and directors and officers liability insurance, but with an emphasis on cyber liability insurance. In addition to negotiating terms and placing coverage, Patrick's cyber liability insurance practice also includes advising clients on how best to align breach response, planning with insurance and risk mitigation solutions. Patrick also provides claims expertise and assists clients by managing and advocating on their behalf. So with that, I will turn it over to Patrick.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brendan. I hope everybody can hear me all right. Thank you for having us present today. We're excited to be here and to share with you a little bit more on the wonderful topic of cyber insurance and the role that it can play within an organization's entire risk management and network security posture. So with that, just a little bit of introduction. As Brendan mentioned, I'm our national cyber practice leader, so I do a lot of presentations and educating of clients and prospective clients on this topic, and have been with Hub for a number of years, for the past 3 years actually, and prior to that with a boutique brokerage, always specializing in those specialty lines coverages as Brendan had mentioned. And like everybody working from home, you may hear a dog in the background, so I'll have to apologize for that too. If you want to flip to the next slide, Brendan, that would be great. So whenever we're discussing the topic of network security, privacy liability issues, cyber risk, everybody is a big fan of statistics. So I thought I would share a few to start things off. Now I can tell you when it comes to statistics, you can cure your insomnia by reading through all of them. But here were a few that I thought were poignant and relevant and quite current, although these stats are changing on an almost daily basis. We hear a lot about the rise of ransomware attacks on organizations. The average ransom payment, according to Coveware, which is a company that does a lot of the forensic investigation and ransom payment facilitation, is still, I mean, a relatively small number really in terms of about 233,000. However, it is rising. That's up about 31%, even in a short period of time from 2020. What we're also seeing is there's been a rise in large amounts being demanded. So this is an average payment, but we're now starting to see threat actors demanding amounts in the millions, sometimes tens of millions too. As far as size and scope, there was, interesting point that Brendan had mentioned that a proper cybersecurity posture is arguably more important for smaller organizations than larger. And this speaks to another one of the statistics there. You see that 25%. That was actually taken from an interesting survey that was done where they analyzed a lot of different claims data. The bottom line is that smaller and medium-sized companies are far more susceptible to the financial impact of some sort of ransomware event or cybersecurity threat. The fourth statistic there, when it talks about multi-billion-dollar organizations, often have the financial heft to be able to survive an event, because the amount that it ends up costing them is a fraction of their annual revenues. However, if we look at smaller organizations, it is likely that they will lose a far greater amount of revenues from an attack, upwards of a quarter of their revenues, if they have to suffer through that. So something really important to keep in mind. And the final one, and this is really speaking to the insurance industry itself. Insurance companies like to measure themselves with something called a combined ratio, which is effectively premium brought in the door versus claims and expense costs going out the door. The rise in attacks we are seeing is having a significant effect on these insurers, where towards the end of last year, we saw an average payout of 120% on this, 128% on this combined ratio. So effectively, for every dollar of premium that the insurers were bringing out, they were paying out $1.28. So not exactly a great business model. What we're seeing, therefore, is not that companies cannot get insurance by any means. There's still plenty of markets available. But what we are seeing is a lot more underwriting scrutiny being brought by insurers to organizations wanting to secure the insurance. So all the more reason, the benefits of working through the CyberSecure Canada platform in order to develop a really comprehensive and strong cybersecurity posture is going to have the benefit of easier access to insurance. And when it comes to insurance, as I'll be explaining in this webinar, a cyber liability insurance policy is going to be the greatest thing that you've ever purchased, if heaven forbid you should have some sort of security event. With that, I'm going to move along just so that we keep things rolling there, Brendan. So if you wouldn't mind just flipping to the next slide. So as I've been placing this kind of coverage for over 10 years, in the early days, everybody would consider cyber risk to be very specifically a kind of IT thing. You know, it's something for the information technologists. It is for the data scientists, the computer scientists, et cetera. And when you talk to an organization about having proper posture, anything IT was kind of a bit of a scary thing to talk about. These days, it's not that. Cybersecurity, network security, privacy liability concerns are very much a topic of concern for senior management of organizations now. There's no question that senior management has to be involved in the process, have to understand what their posture is, have to make sure that things are being properly protected. We're now starting to see more and more claims being brought against boards of directors for not having proper protocols and measures in place to deal with securing data. This statistic at the bottom here is a really interesting one. I always like to show this, and it really hasn't changed too much in the last 5 years when the same organization did the survey earlier. It was a survey of risk managers, or people who are in charge of purchasing insurance on behalf of organizations. And the question was just simply posed, what's the biggest obstacle to selling the coverage? Because statistically, we still have a lot of organizations who are not buying cyber insurance coverage. The take-up rate in Canada is probably in around 10 to 15% of organizations, so not very big. And so when asked, you know, why is this the case? It's not necessarily the fact that you can't get coverage or the application process is complicated, or there's limited number of insurers who can do this. The biggest concerns were not truly understanding what the exposure was, and more importantly, I'd suggest not understanding what a policy can actually do for you. So that's what we're going to explore today. Over to the next slide, please, Brendan. So I'm going to start off with some of the standard kind of questions that we typically get when we start talking about this topic, and some of the pushback that we have from clients as to why they don't feel the need to buy the coverage. Things like a director of IT security assuring that the systems are 100% secure. Unfortunately, this is not the case, and I'm sure that won't be a surprise to anybody who's listening in. The reality is that, unfortunately, there's no such thing as a system that's 100% secure, as evidenced by some of the organizations that are being hit with attacks these days. Some of them are the most technically sound and sophisticated organizations around with massive IT budgets, and yet they can still be vulnerable. And sometimes the vulnerability is not from the system itself, but rather from the people who are operating it, or for the people who are involved in organizations who are unwittingly fished into clicking on things that they shouldn't be clicking on. The next reason that some people give for not buying the coverage has to do with what kind of data they hold on to. And they say, well, look, we're not holding on to anything particularly sensitive, such as healthcare information, and therefore we just don't think we have a lot of exposure. Again, this is something of a myth too, in the sense that pretty much every kind of piece of data has some sort of value to it. We've seen cases, for example, in the courts out of Alberta, and the decisions by privacy commissions to say the mere theft of a listing of emails is significant enough, because a list of emails in the hands of a threat actor can be used for phishing campaigns and the like. So pretty much every bit of information that an organization is holding on to is going to be considered sensitive. We've already talked about the large versus the smaller organizations who can be susceptible to these attacks. And the notion of a company being too small to be a target, unfortunately, just isn't true. The threat actors out there are casting a very large net. And in some cases, they don't even know who they're targeting. They only know that they've got a target when their sort of alarm systems go off. So we hear a lot about the larger breaches, the Targets, the Home Depots, the Equifaxes. However, it's the smaller ones that we don't hear about that often are extremely costly to organizations because of how much they'll cost them. The notion of outsourcing any kind of responsibility for data to a third party, that can certainly give you some measure of ability to go after the third party for your relying on them to protect information. However, that's not going to limit the liability that the original party has towards securing the data. So again, outsourcing is not necessarily a protection against claims against you. And finally, investing in technology rather than insurance. By all means, investing in technology systems is very important and critical. The insurance piece, however, is a complement to that. It's a final level of protection that we would suggest goes hand in hand with investing in proper technologies. On to the next slide, please, Brendan. So, I'm not sure if it was mentioned in the outset. I happen to be a lawyer by training, which I always tell clients not to hold against me when I'm talking about insurance and law. But I always like to start conversations about where this issue of privacy concerns kind of originated. And sure enough, it really came out of some litigation that was developing. This is back now in 2014, 5-6 years ago, where up until that time, issues of privacy concern were important, but were not seen as something so incredible that organizations had to really develop a game plan around it, if you will. We had a particular case come out back in 2013, 2014, which kind of changed the landscape quite a bit. This case called Jones versus Siggy. And effectively what happened was the courts created a brand new law. They created a new tort, so a new civil action called intrusion upon seclusion. And what it effectively said was, look, privacy is sacrosanct. It's something that's really, really important. And the mere fact that somebody has had their information compromised is significant in and of itself to create a legal remedy. You don't even necessarily have to have suffered significant damages. The fact that your privacy has been breached is bad enough. And what that had the effect of doing was suddenly making privacy a concern for many organizations, particularly those who were professing to protect private information to the nth degree. And when it turned out that they weren't necessarily doing that, the plaintiffs' bar had a real opportunity to bring litigation, and even worse, to bring the litigation in the form of class action forum. So we started to see a lot more activity. Since then, we've had legislative landscape change, where now there are certainly laws and regulations in place that mandate an organization to notify people who have been affected if their data has been breached. So way back in 2018, we suddenly had a federal legislation that set the bar and the tone to say, look, if you're holding on to sensitive information, it's been compromised, and there is a real risk of significant harm to the individual whose information it was, you must notify those people, and you also have to notify the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. So suddenly a lot more obligations on the part of organizations to do something in the event of a breach. And of course, with that comes commensurate cost. One last thing on that is quite interesting too, is that even where there is not a real risk of significant harm, there is still an obligation on organizations to maintain a record of the incident. So we refer to that as a breach log. So if there has been an incident, it has to be recorded. And of course, that can be audited at any time by the Privacy Commissioner's office. So important rules to keep in mind in the Canadian landscape. Next slide there, Brendan. So I'm often asked by clients about examples. They say, Patrick, look, I'm a manufacturer, I'm a large company, I'm a small company, I'm a professional services firm, I'm a retailer, I'm a school. Can you give me some examples of claims involving network security and privacy liability exposures? And to that I say, well, I can. However, the truth of it all is that the threat actors out there are industry agnostic. They really aren't all that interested in what industry you're in. They're interested in disruption with an effort to monetize it. So what we tend to focus on is less on the industry and more on what I would call the attack vectors, and the ways in which these things can happen. So I refer to these as sort of three pillars of breach exposure. We have right up at the top of the list these days is ransomware and cyber extortion events. So we've seen a significant increase in these kinds of scenarios, whereby somehow the threat actor is brought into the network security system of the target, and they will encrypt data that's been held by the organization and refuse to unencrypt it unless some sort of a payment is made. And the variants of malware are becoming increasingly sophisticated. It's becoming harder and harder to recover, to have systems recover. We're even seeing scenarios in which there's a double ransom. So in other words, the threat actor gets into the network system, reviews everything, maybe even exfiltrates a lot of data, and then encrypts everything and asks for a demand to unencrypt. And once that demand is paid, they then come back with a second extortion effort, because they said, look, we've already exfiltrated everything that we need. Now we need another ransom paid before we post it in places that you don't want us to post this information. So ransomware and cyber extortion is very much a concern. The next one is what we would call targeted intrusions within a system. And so organizations, particularly those with affiliated organizations and organizations that have integrated networks, there is a concern that getting in at the at one level will allow them to view everything from the inside and escalate privileges to get to other areas within the organization. So, we sometimes will use examples of sophisticated not-for-profits who may be working with volunteers who are using their own network systems to communicate information to, the parent not-for-profit organization. And if they don't have particularly strong network security hygiene, there's the ability for the threat actor to take advantage at the lower level, but then escalate and seek higher areas of the organization to compromise. So that is a concern, this sort of navigation and escalation of privilege issue. The third pillar is phishing attacks, which could well lead to a cyber extortion event. And it is simply, threat actors who pose as somebody who managed to get people to click on things that then opens up their network to the threat actor. And sometimes we see that involving money. So what we would consider social engineering fraud, where people wire money out of the organization thinking it's going to the right person when in fact it's a threat actor. Or other times just simply clicking on things that allow the threat actor into the system, and from there they can launch a ransomware attack. Perhaps they engage in a business email compromise attack, whereby they pretend to be that person sitting on the desk writing emails. So these are the three sort of threat vectors that we think are really important to highlight. And thankfully, an insurance policy can provide comfort to protect against any of these. On to the next slide, please, Brendan. So we're often asked, gee, Patrick, surely with all these wonderful lines of insurance coverage we're purchasing this coverage somewhere else, whether it be in our general liability coverage, our business interruption, our crime coverage, our E&O coverage, or our D&O coverage. I used to say that the answer was yes, possibly, but I wouldn't want to rely upon it. The answer is more and more becoming, no, you're not going to get that coverage under any of these other policies. Previously, what would happen is we would see either policies possibly being endorsed with a small amount of cyber insurance coverage, but certainly nothing that you'd ever want to rely upon entirely. But generally speaking, we're now seeing insurers start to restrict the cyber risk from other coverages on the basis that it was never their intent to provide, cyber insurance coverage on the backs of say, a general liability policy, which is typically there to protect against slip and fall and personal injury events. Or traditional business interruption coverage is part of a property policy, and the trigger for the business interruption under a property policy tends to be things like flood or fire or wind, some sort of tangible event, not what a cyber event can be. When we get to crime, as I often say to clients, the difference between crime insurance and cyber insurance is that crime insurance is about the protection of money, while cyber insurance really focuses on the protection of data. Now, it is possible to have a cyber policy cover some aspects of crime, such as social engineering events where money goes out the door to the threat actor, but it's not common these days. And finally, when we talk about either E&O or D&O coverage, these are coverages that will respond should there be a claim brought against. But more often than not, what will happen in a cyber event is the company knows there's something going on, and they want to resolve it expeditiously before anybody else knows about it. So in that respect, the D&O policy or a D&O policy, if they ever were to respond to a cyber event, it would only be after they are sued, and it's not there to protect them to react and to have triage protection, if you will, to get them back up and running. And they certainly are not designed to pick up any costs associated with payments of ransom either. With that, Brendan, on to the next slide. So now I'm going to focus on the actual insurance coverage itself. So the magic, or what I would consider the magic of a cyber insurance policy, is that it's really divided into two major components: what we call third-party liability coverage and first-party liability coverage. So on the third-party liability coverage, we typically have three major coverage grants. I'll start from the bottom and working up. So the first one is a kind of internet media or communications liability coverage. So what it says is that if you have any kind of electronic communication that is read by a third party, and should the third party believe that what you have represented in your electronic communication is negligent, is slanderous, is not yours, and they decide to bring suit, then the policy will respond. So that's what our network, or rather our internet media liability or communications liability piece is designed to do. While it's a nice coverage to have, it's usually not the main reason that an organization will buy cyber insurance coverage. That falls to the next two. So the next one is the network security coverage. So what it says is, if your network system should fail, or should something happen to it such that it then imposes a problem on an outside third party, and they in turn suffer financial harm, they can sue you for their troubles. So we used to use the example of a virus perhaps navigating from the insured system to another, and then causing havoc with that third party, and all of a sudden they bring a lawsuit. But what we're seeing more of these days is quite a bit more sophisticated. So if, for example, you as an insured have relationships with multiple vendors, and are connected with them by way of a technology network, the concern is that somebody could enter your system unbeknownst to you, find out that there is a connection between you and an outside vendor or third party, and then they navigate to that outside third party vendor and cause havoc. And if upon investigation, the third party vendor finds out that the problem really began with the insured, then they can come back and sue. And that's where this network security piece would respond to protect against those sorts of claims and lawsuits. The final piece on the third-party liability is the privacy piece, and the privacy piece is there to protect against claims brought by third parties who allege that you failed to protect sensitive personal information. So if you are, as an organization, have a bunch of sensitive info that's, say, on a laptop, and an employee perhaps takes the laptop home and inadvertently leaves it in a coffee shop, and all the data on it is not encrypted, and something happens to it, and the owners of that data find out about it, have been compromised, they can bring a lawsuit against the organization for that breach of privacy, and the insurance policy will respond. So those are the three major components of the third-party liability component of a cyber insurance policy. While these are great coverages to have, important coverages to have, at least 80% of the claims that we see are not on the third party liability half of the policy, but on the first party. And with that, I'll ask Brendan if you can advance to the next slide. So when it comes to first party expenses and coverage, what we're really talking about is protection for events where, let's say, the head of IT comes to the management team on the Friday of a long weekend, just like we have coming up soon, and says, look, we've noticed there's something odd going on in the network. We don't think it's anything, but we're going to investigate. And just give us some time, I'm sure it's nothing. So they investigate through Friday and Saturday, and on Sunday, they determine that the problem is still there and they can't quite figure out how best to fix it. Perhaps they've started to, take data from backups and wipe clean and restore from backups and all that, but they're still noticing there's some problems going on. To which the head of IT says, hey, not to worry, I know somebody who can probably help us out with this. So in comes the outsourced vendor to try to help. And sure enough, by the time Monday rolls around of the long weekend, the problem is still not resolved. And now there's a concern of what we're going to do when employees show up on Tuesday and they can't access anything on their computers. Everybody's going to have a concern. Business will grind to a halt. Oh my God, what do we do? So the benefit of a cyber insurance policy is on that Friday afternoon, when it's suspected that there's some serious problems going on, the cyber insurance policy will respond. And you can trigger the coverage under it to allow you to bring in all of the specialists that you're going to want access to help you resolve this problem. So it will give resources to your IT folks by way of very specialized experts who are used to investigating breaches. So they will show up, or perhaps they can do the work remotely and start investigating and deploying various tools to find out if there is, in fact, a serious threat and problem. And if there is, for example, it's determined that a bunch of information has been exfiltrated, the policy will give you access to legal support. So what we call the breach coach, who can assist in figuring out what to do. And in some cases, you'll actually want to reach out to the breach coach lawyer first, because if any forensic investigation has to be conducted, then it's the breach coach lawyer that can retain them to do the investigation, so that any work product from the investigation can be secured under solicitor-client privilege, or as best as they can. In some cases, people have to be notified of what the problem is, and depending on how many people have to be notified, that can be a very significant task. And so again, these policies will pay for that expense. Similarly with public relations support, it will pay for that. Similarly, if financial information has been compromised and people are concerned about their credit worthiness, you can use these policies to pay for credit monitoring expense coverage too, for any of the people who have been affected. There's some further, what I would consider ancillary first-party coverages to the policy, and that would be, we've talked about network extortion and ransomware events. So these policies will pay for the experts to come in and negotiate with the threat actors. And if there's a need to pay to pay the ransom, then these policies will pay for that as well. In some cases, systems have to be rebuilt. Data has to be recovered and restored, and that takes time and money to do that. Again, these policies can respond to provide that. And finally, we have scenarios in which a network system is brought to a grinding halt, but business has to carry on, but a business can't very well do it immediately because of the downtime that they'll have before their network is running again. So these policies can pay for that business interruption loss and expenses that come with dealing with an incident. So as I said, about 80% or more of the claims that we see all really fall within this first party expense bucket. And so it's so super critical to have access to that. I like to say, if you ever had a breach, number one, would you know who to call? And number two, would you know how you're going to pay for it? And the answer is found in these cyber insurance policies. On to the next slide there, Brendan. So I wanted to bring this topic up only because it's something that comes up quite frequently. We talked about crime issues, and we talked about phishing campaigns where people are lured and deceived into sending money out the door. As I said, crime policies are about protection of money. Cyber policies are about the protection of data. And historically, we've had to deal with situations where there is a lure and somebody sends money out of the organization believing they're sending it to a vendor, an appropriate person who's entitled to the money. Then they find out that that's not the case. So sometimes people would look to their cyber policy to provide coverage for that, because they said, look, it was a cyber threat. It happened via my computer, so hopefully my cyber policy will respond. Most cyber policies will not, because they say, look, that's about money going out the door. It's not about data going out the door. So then our insurers will turn to the crime policy to say, hey, look, we've basically been robbed. However, when it comes to crime insurance, they typically are there to protect against employee theft. And in this case, the employee didn't steal anything. The employer was just tricked into sending money out the door. So what does this all mean? If you want protection for that social engineering fraud scenario, the best thing to do is to speak to your crime insurance carrier and ask for them to add a specific endorsement to the policy that will give coverage for social engineering fraud. Or alternatively, there are some cyber insurers that are willing to provide that protection under their cyber insurance policy. So something to be concerned of. Would highly recommend a review of your insurance coverage to make sure that you have those proper protections in place. On to the next slide there, Brendan. I think this is our last slide. And I thought it important to just give you a sense of what it is that the underwriters are looking for when they're assessing a risk. And what I can tell you is that the landscape for cyber insurance has been changing quite a bit, even in the last 3-4 months. And that's due to a number of events that have taken place. There was an event involving a network security company called SolarWinds that was announced in December, and they had been hacked. The software that they deploy to their clients to monitor their network security had a piece of malware implanted into it. And so SolarWinds unknowingly sent out patch upgrades to all of their clients. And in fact, the patch upgrade had malware within it. So that caused quite a ripple within the IT community and certainly within the insurance community too. We've seen even most recently some vulnerabilities involving Microsoft Exchange Server. So people have been desperate to patch any vulnerabilities in their system. However, the issue is whether or not the threat actor is still within the landscape, even though the patches have been applied. So there's a lot going on in the cyber insurance industry to bring a lot more focus and attention on who's going to get insured, how much limit can they purchase, what the cost is going to be, and really serious risk selection on the part of the insurers. So this slide sets out the 4 kind of main buckets that an underwriter will look at to assess the level of risk of an organization to determine if they want to provide them with an insurance policy. So in one bucket, there's a lot of questions in the application process about records and about information. So what all kind of information is an organization holding on to? And better still, what are you doing about planning in the event of a situation? So Do you have a cyber incident response plan? Do you have a disaster recovery plan? What about a business continuity plan? All these sorts of things are being asked for and in some cases insisted upon by insurance companies. And so once again, going through the CyberSecure Canada and getting that level of certification will be such a big added bonus when insurers look at that. So information is an important aspect of underwriting. The people part is important too, and that talks about, what kinds of controls are put in place to monitor what employees are able to get access to when it comes to data. And also, as we mentioned at the top, this is very much a management issue. And so they like to ask questions about how engaged the executive management team is towards making sure there's proper cybersecurity posture in place. There's very often a significant number of questions asked about the actual net information security of an organization. So what all kinds of data do you have? What kind of auditing measures are done both internally and externally? Is penetration testing being done? What kind of safeguards do you have in place from an information security standpoint for the data you're holding on to? And I can tell you that the matter of multi-factor authentication is huge right now amongst insurers, to the point where if an organization does not have MFA in place, it may be a challenge for them to secure the insurance. And then finally, they'll often ask questions about vendors. They like to know about network integration, and they like to know, what is the basis of the relationship that you have with vendors? Are there contractual obligations? Are there measures put in place to make sure that the vendors who you are relying upon are equally secure to what you're doing as an organization as well? So with that, I believe we're right up to our timeline. I think we may even be at about 45 minutes or so with our introduction, Brendan. So I'm more than happy to take any questions if people have interest in adding it to the chat room, or as Brendan said, you're more than welcome to send questions to us at the email address that you can see there, and we'll be delighted to help out with any questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. It was great. Any questions from the audience? I have a quick question.
Sure.
As we're waiting here, I've heard a few, of course, this isn't coming from a small organization, it'd be a large organization, but I've heard of organizations that self-insure for their cyber insurance. They've kind of assessed the cost and they feel that, it's a pill they can swallow. What would you say would be the downfall to something like that?
Well, it's a good question, Brendan. And I mean, cost, it's interesting. Cost is certainly one factor, right? In terms of how much is one going to pay for an insurance policy. But I would say what is becoming an increasingly great concern is access to the professionals that you need in a time of crisis. So in some cases, I mean, why are people buying the policy? They're buying it for all sorts of reasons, of course. Sometimes it's a contractual requirement, so they're not going to get a piece of business unless they have the policy. But for large organizations that may have, the bandwidth to deal with some sort of an incident, they're going to want to make sure that they have some sort of retainer or ability to access the professionals that they're going to need. Because we are almost at the point that if you don't have a cyber insurance policy, and if you suffer from some sort of an incident, you may struggle to get the right professionals working for you. And the reason being is that most of them are going to be on panels to insurance companies, and they're going to prioritize the work of the insurance companies and the insurers who have the risks more so than anything else. Furthermore, with the panel of experts that insurance companies set up, you can rest assured that they have this wonderful leverage to be able to make sure that the costing is kept in check as well. So vendors will typically have preferred rates for insurance companies when they do this kind of work. So we certainly hear of organizations that are self-insuring, Brendan. It's becoming increasingly something that we would suggest an insurance policy is a better bet to do it, because it will give you access to everything that you really need in a very timely and cost-effective way.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So we have a few questions that have come in. First,
Great.
the first question, are there local offices in Ontario that offer this discount, so the 10% discount?
The answer is yes. So what we did at Hub in our relationship with CyberNB was we wanted to be able to offer that. So yes, that goes across the board. Just based on CyberNB, where they're located, we thought we'd include that particular email address. But by all means, if it's an organization outside of the Maritimes, you can certainly still access any one of our offices across the country through that email.
Perfect. The next question is, how often are claims denied? Common reasons why they would be denied, as in you have an incident, but the insurance company refuses to pay.
Fair enough. Always top of mind when we talk about insurance companies. And gee, is there something in that 6-point font policy wording that's going to deny my coverage? What we see is, I mean, of course, every claim is different. And every situation is different, and it's possible that the policy will respond or won't, depending on what's going on. But I would say I've not been involved in cases where there's been a pure denial, unless it's obvious that it had nothing to do with a network security or privacy event, and they say, look, you really have to go to your general liability policy for coverage under this, or your property insurance policy for that. Where there sometimes becomes, let's call it a difficult conversation, is the claim is responded to, the claim is covered. However, what exactly is covered has to be clarified. So, in other words, and for example, we'll have some situations in which an insured may have an incident. They reach out to an IT provider, a forensic IT firm, to investigate the problem. That firm is not on the panel for the insurance company, and that vendor ends up doing all sorts of work to remediate the situation, including adding a whole bunch of other things to the network system to make it more secure on a go-forward basis. And often insurers will have a little bit of a challenge with that, because they say, look, our policy is designed to triage the situation, and it's designed to perhaps restore your data, but it's not designed to put you in a far better position network security wise at the end than you were before you had the incident. So they call it a betterment provision. So it's not designed to improve things, it's designed to maintain the status quo. So that's not really a denial. It's more of an aspect of a conversation that you have to have with the insurer if you're in that situation. So what we like to do is, at the moment an insured has an issue, is we want them to reach out to us, and myself and my team can hold the client's hand through the process and make sure that the messaging is communicated to the insurer properly, to say, look, here's the situation that we're in. We have to work really fast. We know who your panel providers are, so we at Hub are going to call those providers and get them working for the client, and we're going to monitor what is all going on, so that insurance company, you won't be in a position to say that it shouldn't be covered because you approved it along the way. So I know that's a long-winded answer to a simple question, but I hope that gives a little bit more context of when we see insurance companies kind of questioning events.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that looks like we're at the top of the hour. That's all we will have time for this session. If we didn't get your question, again, please send an email to atl.inbox@hubinternational.com or info@cybernb.ca. Thank you for your presentation today, Patrick, and thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brendan. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now.